You are about to inherit a planet, not metaphorically, literally. Within the next few decades, if the current trajectory holds, human beings will establish a permanent settlement on Mars, a new world, a second home for the species. The most significant expansion of human civilization since the first people walked out of Africa and spread across the Earth tens of thousands of years ago. And the question almost nobody in the official mission planning documents is asking out loud is, which humans? Exactly. Because right now, today, the people designing the rockets, funding the missions, selecting the crews, and writing the architecture plans for humanity's future on Mars are, by an overwhelming majority, not black. That's not an accusation. It's an observation. And observations about who gets to design something tend to become observations about who gets to use it. So let's ask the question properly. Will black people go to Mars? And if the answer is complicated, which it is, what exactly makes it complicated? There are at least 4 separate forces at work here, and they don't all point in the same direction. Start with the one nobody expects. If you were trying to think carefully about which human biological traits might be relevant for long-term survival on Mars, melanin would be worth discussing, though not in the simplistic way the question might suggest. Here's the context. Mars has no global magnetic field. Earth's magnetic field deflects a significant portion of the solar and cosmic radiation that would otherwise reach the surface. Mars lost its magnetic field billions of years ago. As a result, the Martian surface receives roughly 700 millisieverts of radiation per year, compared to an average of about 3 millisieverts on Earth's surface. That's not an instantly lethal dose, but it represents a serious long-term cancer and cellular damage risk that every Mars colonist would live with permanently. Melanin, the pigment responsible for darker skin, is among the most effective natural radiation-absorbing compounds in human biology. It dissipates ultraviolet radiation as heat before it can damage DNA. A 2022 study, published in a peer-reviewed journal, found that melanin also provides measurable protection against certain forms of ionizing radiation beyond UV. This doesn't mean darker skin is a decisive advantage on Mars, or that biology alone determines fitness for space. Radiation suits, habitat shielding, and mission design matter far more than skin pigment. But the idea that darker skin is somehow a disadvantage in space environments doesn't hold up to scrutiny. The limited biology here runs the other direction. And then there's the cold. Mars surface temperatures average around minus 60 degrees Celsius, dropping further at the poles in winter. The notion that people from warmer climates are less equipped for cold is not supported by serious physiological research. Cold tolerance is primarily a function of preparation, equipment, and acclimatization, not skin color or ancestry. That particular assumption is a cultural stereotype, not a scientific finding. Then there's the structural problem, and this one is harder to dismiss. The current architecture of Mars settlement is largely private sector driven. NASA's programs remain important, but the organizations most likely to put the first permanent settlers on Mars are companies like SpaceX. Private companies with private funding, private selection criteria, and pricing structures that will, at least initially, reflect the economics of an extremely expensive new technology. SpaceX has publicly discussed reducing Mars ticket prices to something in the range of a median American house price as a long-term goal, a figure that currently sits around $300,000 to $400,000. The median black household wealth in the United States, according to the Federal Reserve's 2022 survey of consumer finances, was $44,900. The median white household wealth was $285,000, roughly 6 times higher. Black household wealth has risen significantly since 2019, which is genuinely positive. But the dollar gap between black and white median wealth widened by around $50,000 in that same period, reaching over $220,000. Progress in percentage terms has not yet translated into closing the gap in absolute dollars. This matters because wealth is likely to be the first filter through which potential Mars colonists pass, at least in the early commercial phases. And a filter calibrated to wealth is not a racially neutral filter in the current United States, whatever its stated intentions. That doesn't mean no black person will afford to go. It means the demographics of early access will almost certainly reflect the demographics of wealth, unless someone specifically designs the mission architecture to counteract that. Then there's the selection pipeline, which is separate from ticket prices and worth examining on its own terms. NASA's astronaut corps has made meaningful progress on racial diversity in recent decades. The 2021 astronaut class was among the most diverse in the agency's history, with several black astronauts selected. That's real and worth acknowledging. But the pipeline that feeds into astronaut selection, elite military service, advanced STEM degrees from selective universities, test pilot programs, reflects the access inequalities that exist further upstream in American education and military institutions. A more diverse astronaut class is progress. It is not the same as a structurally equitable pipeline. The private sector picture is less transparent. SpaceX, Blue Origin, and comparable companies are not subject to the same public diversity reporting requirements as federal agencies. What is publicly known about their leadership and engineering workforce composition suggests patterns similar to the broader technology industry, which remains significantly underrepresented by black professionals at senior levels, despite years of stated commitments to improvement. Selection processes designed and operated by a relatively homogeneous group tend to replicate that group's composition over time, not through explicit exclusion, but through the well-documented mechanisms of network effects, affinity bias, and criteria built around the experiences of whoever is doing the designing. And then there's the gene pool question, which is where the biology and the politics converge in a way that serious Mars architecture discussions rarely address directly. A self-sustaining Mars colony needs genetic diversity to survive long-term. This is population genetics, not ideology. Small founding populations with limited genetic variation are vulnerable to what biologists call the founder effect, where rare recessive disorders become more prevalent and the population's adaptive capacity narrows over generations. Estimates for the minimum viable founding population for long-term genetic stability range from several hundred to several thousand individuals, and those individuals need to represent meaningful genetic variation across the human species. That genetic variation is not evenly distributed globally. Sub-Saharan African populations contain more genetic diversity than all other human populations combined, a consequence of the fact that modern humans originated in Africa, and every group that migrated outward carried only a subset of the continent's genetic variation. A Mars colony drawn primarily from wealthy Western populations would not just be politically unrepresentative. It would, by the mathematics of population genetics, begin with a narrower genetic foundation than a colony that reflected the full range of human diversity. The scientific case and the equity case point toward the same conclusion, though it's worth being precise that neither settles the question of how to actually achieve that representation given the structural barriers described above. None of this produces a clean answer. Black people will almost certainly go to Mars. Some individuals currently in the astronaut pipeline may be among the first humans to get there. The question isn't binary, it's about proportion, power, and who gets to shape what Mars becomes. The harder question is whether Mars will be built by and for the full range of humanity, or whether it will be built primarily by and for the people who already control most of Earth's wealth and institutions, and then, once established, gradually open to others on terms set by whoever arrived first. That is also a pattern with substantial historical precedent. Every major frontier in recorded history has had a version of this problem. The people who get there first write the rules, name the places, and establish the defaults that everyone who follows inherits. Mars won't invent a new version of this dynamic. It will carry forward whatever version we bring with us, unless the people designing the mission make a deliberate, specific decision that this time the outcome should be different. That decision isn't being made on Mars. It's being made right now, in funding meetings and selection committees and engineering teams on Earth, by people who may not be asking this question at all. That's not a Mars problem. That's the same problem humanity has been failing to solve for centuries. Mars just happens to be the next place we'll find out whether we've learned anything.